All right, my friends, welcome back to another V-Rising video. This is going to be the first episode in a new PvP series that is designed to give you a grasp of the basics of PvP, as well as just general PvP theory. This game is incredibly deep, and this series will more so focus on players who are new or interested in getting into PvP, as well as intermediate players who may have solid mechanics but are looking to increase their knowledge to have more success in PvP. This episode will be primarily focused more around spells and how to approach them when deciding what build to use. Also keep in mind that just because I don't mention a spell, it doesn't necessarily mean that that spell is bad or unusable. Every spell has its place, and there are some crazy builds out there. I'm more so just giving you a place to start learning, as well as just start to get better. So disclaimer, playing in V-Arena or servers like V-Arena versus open world are incredibly different. They do share a lot of similarities, but in V-Arena you have maxed out gears, spells, your pick of artifact weapons and legendary weapons with specific infusions, as well as stats. You can customize your spell jewels to be max rolled with ease, and that isn't really something that you can generally do in open world. However, having the ability to practice fights over and over again without losing any mats or having to respawn will dramatically increase the rate at which you improve and gain experience in PvP. However, something else to note, you can't permanently backpedal in open world like you can. I see a lot of players do in V-Arena. There are obstacles, buildings, resource nodes, there are PvE patrols, as well as verticality to take into effect. And with that in mind, if you do choose to practice in V-Arena, I highly recommend that you practice in one of the designated dueling arenas instead of just in the open courtyard area when possible, in order to avoid the bad habit of constantly backpedaling all the time. In open world, so when it comes to spells, in open world, it is a balancing act between what is PvP viable as well as what is good for clearing PvE. You absolutely can use PvP-oriented spells to fight PvE, however, sometimes it can be kind of annoying, as well as maybe a little bit slower or even dangerous, where if you're using PvP spells that aren't quite good enough to handle large groups of enemies, you can start taking damage and then leave yourself open at low HP to ganks from another passing player. So finding a well-balanced build that suits your playstyle, as well as at least just understanding what the point of your build is and how to execute it, is crucial for doing well in PvE, as well as doing well in PvP in that open world scenario. So look, we've all been there. We beat a few bosses in Farbane, and we suddenly have access to Aftershock, Chaos Volley, and we're looking at that damage and we're like, oh yeah, we just start spamming like crazy using that and thinking that we're going to be doing fine. But hopefully the fights that I've been showcasing in the background have shown why it is not a good idea to always run two offensive spells in PvP. So with that said, what makes a good PvP build? Well, to answer that question, we're going to kind of have to get into some basic PvP theory. Whenever you consider your spells and abilities, you should see them as resources. So you should be thinking about these resources in terms of what kind of value you're getting from those resources. This is a concept that's prevalent in virtually all PvP games that I know of, but it's especially prevalent in things like MOBAs. For example, if you spend all of your mana and cooldowns in League of Legends or Dota 2 clearing creep waves, then chances are you're going to get punished into oblivion by any semi-competent player. If you've ever played a fighting game or something like Super Smash Bros. And you've never just try playing that with never blocking or shielding, and you will get absolutely comboed endlessly. So let's look at this in the context of V-Rising. Let's compare two spells. We have Chaos Volley, which can deal a total of 220% spell damage if you land both shots, plus an additional 50% with the Ignite mechanic, versus Bloodright, which deals a measly 100% magic damage, makes you invulnerable for 1.2 seconds, and applies Leech. So in theory, when first looking at these spells, the potential value of Chaos Volley seems like it would just be way higher than Bloodright. But in reality, Bloodright is significantly more value than Chaos Volley in the overwhelming majority of cases in PvP. especially whenever we introduce jewels into the equation. So think about it this way. If you miss a single Chaos Volley shot, the value of your Chaos Volley has been cut in half. If you miss both, then you have no value. The only thing that you could technically argue is, I guess, some zoning, but other than that, it's not really much. With Blood Ray, on the other hand, you can use it to just immediately negate another person's spell or ability. So in this situation, if you Chaos Volley onto someone's Blood Ray, you're trading your spell for their spell, you're entirely negating their Chaos Volley, and you're allowing yourself the opportunity to reposition. And if you have the right jewels, you could be dealing more instances of damage if they're closer to you. You can heal yourself, you can empower your next primary attack, etc., etc., etc. So even without jewels though, one of the most important aspects of defensive abilities in this game is the ability to give, to create openings. It's not just that you're negating the other player's individual attack and dealing damage to them, it's also that you're also often able to convert a counter or a defensive spell into additional damage opportunities and combos, while preventing yourself from those same situations. So enter the concept of value. In PvP, the goal of your spells should be able to get and create as much consistent value as possible. It's generally very easy to miss or get countered whenever you use a projectile spell. Whereas on the flip side, it's generally very simple to use a counter or a defensive spell to get some kind of value. So what does that mean for our spell choices? Does that mean that we should just take all offensive spells completely off the table? Absolutely not. When built correctly, projectile spells can deal insane damage in PvP. They're generally very high risk and high reward in that regard. If you land projectile spells, it will deal a ton of damage, and things like Crystal Lance, for example, will do huge nukes. And they also set up combos rather nicely because they freeze instantaneously. So that is something that you can use, and one way that you can take advantage of a projectile spell. Also, the only counter to defensive abilities in this game is to either not proc them at all by just not attacking, or to hit someone with an AoE while they're countering or using a defensive spell. Spells like Cyclone, Void, Bone Explosion, Frost Nova, Aftershock, things like that, they all hit through defensive abilities. So shouldn't that just mean that AoEs are essentially countering all defensive spells, so we should just be using those? Well, not exactly. So currently, move speed is the king of PvP. It is extremely, extremely powerful right now because there are so many ways to get so much of it. At endgame, you have the Shadow set with Dracula's armor, you have Rogue Blood, you have stats on weapons, specific necklaces, certain spells. They all add up to just be tons and tons of movement speed, and which allows you to dodge things very easily. Move speed in general is a huge counter to AoE spells because they are telegraphed, and it allows you enough time to just walk out of them. And this is where things like Blood Rage, Power Surge, and even Lightning Curtain come into play here. Lightning Curtain's more so something you use on like the defensive side, but it is still very good for this. These spells work as hybrid offensive and defensive spells because they give you huge steroids to move speed, attack speed, and with the right jewels, they give attack damage buffs, they cleanse you from debuffs, and they can give you shields. So these stim abilities kind of fill offensive gaps with using that you have whenever you're using defensive abilities. They also allow you to kite or close the gap. Lightning Curtain is also a good double variant of this. It has massive value in a huge amount of cases where you can use it to zone out enemies, block their attacks, give yourself movement speed buffs, give you time, give you some breathing room, etc. But overwhelmingly, if you're on the more so like a solo side or for solo damage and big increases to your attack speed, etc., you're going to be looking at Power Surge and Blood Rage. So an extremely powerful combination of spells would be some kind of defensive spell like a counter or a barrier, and then using Blood Rage, Power Surge, or Lightning Curtain. That combination together is going to be extremely good. It gives you a ton of answers to the overwhelming majority of attacks and spells in this game. So keep in mind, this is also where learning to use multiple weapons will fill the gaps for not having any specific offensive spells. but that's going to be a video for another day. We'll go into weapons and weapon swaps in another day. So if you're going to use offensive spells, if you do want to use offensive spells and you're thinking, you know what, I get it, counters, defensive spells and stims and stuff are really good, I just want to use some offensive spells. Well, if you're going to use some offensive spells, I highly advise you to use at least one defensive ability. Just one. It is impossible for me to list the ways that even just a single counter can keep you alive in this game. And the second you remove that counter or defensive spell, you are playing with an insanely huge amount of risk for not really all that much reward. Just being able to land like an additional projectile is decent damage, but if the result of that is you getting just dumpstered completely by somebody with defensive abilities, then it's just not going to be really worth it. There are some places where it does shine. Things like raid defense is really solid to have 2 offensive abilities. If you're kind of just spamming from on top of your castle plot, trying to keep people down and below, that's really helpful. But in general, in open world PvP, if you are running 2 offensive abilities and you meet someone who's even running just a single defensive one, you're very likely going to get rolled by that player. So what spells should we use while learning this PvP? So all counters are good. Every counter is good. All 4 of them are really good. But among them, Discharge stands alone. It is currently extremely powerful, if not broken. The rewards you get for having someone proc your Discharge is like overwhelmingly better than any other defensive option in this game by a large margin. It's just consistently better. So even just a single hit on it will pull the enemy towards you, and if they're close enough, it'll pull them towards you and stun them, which sets them up to not only take static damage from the rotating storm shields, but also sets you up to be able to do things like a spear Q to immediately punish them for it. It's so powerful. Even at a long range, if somebody's using longbow, you can use a Discharge and just pull them in, pull them closer. It's extremely powerful with that. So again, like I said, it's just so easy to get value from that anytime somebody procs it, it's going to be a huge deal for you. However, all of the other counters are good as well. Mistrance, for example, is really good for gap closing. It also has a jewel that will fear enemies who are close to it whenever it procs, as well as another jewel that can dramatically reduce the cooldown on your Q ability, sometimes even just resetting it outright. Which is really good to just keep combos and spells going like that. And of course, it has Phantasm as well, which is really solid. You also have things like Cold Snap, which is really good for freeze builds. The shield that you get at the end of it is really good to kind of keep you healthy. There's a jewel that can give you a huge movement speed buff whenever your Cold Snap is procced, which is really nice. So Cold Snap overall is really good for just like combo builds and setting up easy combos at close range. And then there is Bloodright, which is kind of like a Swiss Army knife. It's a good tool for a lot of situations. It knocks enemies back, which is a good like get off me tool. It has jewels that can allow you to have healing. It can do solid damage with the right jewels. It can throw daggers and do like AoE kind of dagger hits, which is really good. Applying leech, just kind of keeping you healthy there. It can empower your next primary attack to do huge damage. It has really good iframes. It has the potential to make you invisible, which is really good. So overall, Bloodright to me is kind of like a really solid all-around counter. It's actually my favorite spell in the game, honestly. It's just really fun to use and works in a lot of situations. Next, we're going to talk about the barriers. So they are also really, really good. Frost Barrier is really nice. It works as a long-range punish tool because it doesn't really have a range. Somebody could hit you from across the map, and if you block it with a Frost Barrier, it's going to create an ice spike underneath them and hit them or force them to either move, dash, whatever it may be. Barriers also have extended defensive utility over counters, where if you hit a counter, it's just going to proc the counter, and then that's kind of it. Whereas with a barrier, every single attack that it absorbs will do something for you. It just kind of keeps absorbing those attacks over and over until either you recast or the effect ends. Frost Barrier also has a jewel where you can use the recast to freeze an enemy that's chilled, so it's really good as a combo starter that way. If somebody's kind of like poking you from long range and you're moving towards them, you can kind of like move towards them, close the gap with the shield itself or with the barrier itself, they take some frost damage, you recast and freeze them, and then you can combo them. Chaos Barrier, also really good. With the right jewels, the recast after being charged one time will stun an enemy. You can also charge up really strong, and there's also the option of like running the jewel that will give you a power surge if the thing is fully charged, but that's not super consistent in PvP. However, it is very, very good. Chaos Barrier is also really good as a poking tool overall, because if you're not going to be using projectiles, you can kind of use Chaos Barrier to fill that gap where you're shooting projectiles out. And even just getting 1 or 2 charges into your Chaos Barrier is going to give you a huge nuke off of that projectile. So in terms of AoE spells or projectiles, the 2 spells that I would suggest while learning PvP, there is Cyclone, which is also broken along with Discharge, especially with the right jewels. The issue with Cyclone is even though it looks like a projectile, it actually acts like a moving AoE that does not proc defensive abilities. So it even goes through Lightning Curtain for some reason, which I don't really understand. I don't understand why they would do that. It seems like, if anything, even just that single change would bring the spell a little bit more in line, but because it doesn't happen, it just kind of breaks the spell overall. So I'll explain why real quickly. Remember that concept of value that we were talking about, where like you use a spell and try to get value from it? Well, it is extremely difficult to not get some kind of solid value when using Cyclone. Like even just throwing it out randomly, as long as it's not hitting a wall, it is such a powerful zoning tool because it has a jewel where if it hits somebody who already has static on them, it will stun them for up to 0.7 seconds. So you have the situation where you have tons of cyclones kind of going at once. You're constantly applying static, and every time one of these cyclones is going to hit them, you're going to be stunning them. And while it does have some diminishing returns, honestly, it doesn't really matter that much because it just makes it so easy to set other things up like a spear Q. If you combo Cyclone with Discharge, the potential chain stuns from Discharge into Cyclone stuns is just crazy beyond belief. And there's little recourse that the other player can even do about this other than trying to dodge your cyclones, because they can't do anything to avoid them other than just movement, and then trying not to proc Discharge, which means they're not attacking you. So like you just kind of sit there waiting for them to make a move, and the second they try to commit to something, you can use Discharge to stun them, and then they end up stunning themselves with all the cyclones going. So definitely an insanely powerful ability. And then the other AoE that I would suggest would be Void. It's a very good all-around kind of PvE, PvP spell. It's useful in so many PvE interactions. It's really good in PvP as well because it pierces through those defensive abilities. It's good for comboing off of with the suction effect because you know that it's going to pull them to the center of the spell. So you can do things like throw out a Greatsword Q after you see that they're about to get hit by the Void. You could throw out a Greatsword Q and it'll where they're going to be, so you're going to hit it every single time. Really powerful. On top of all these spells, any of the steroid options are really good choices. Blood Rage, Power Surge are both amazing. Power Surge is more so for solo play. Blood Rage works as well, but it also excels in a group setting because you're applying that Blood Rage to all of your allies. Whereas Power Surge is just really good for that ignite damage to kind of keep going over and over. And Lightning Curtain is more so on the defensive side, especially against projectiles. If somebody's using Longbow, I think I mentioned this earlier, you can kind of just place the Lightning Curtain in front of them, and then they either have to walk through your curtain to hit you, or they just can't hit you. If you combo like Discharge and Lightning Curtain, anyone using Longbow is just not really going to be able to do much against you. So, and then after all of these, Phantom Aegis is still a pretty solid choice, I would say. The problem is movement speed is just such a strong effect that Blood Rage and Power Surge to me kind of overwhelm Phantom Aegis. They kind of outshine that spell specifically. However, there are some really cool effects you can do. So one of the jewels will, if it breaks, it will fear surrounding enemies. So if you're playing in a duo situation, and you have that jewel, you can kind of like, if your ally is about to get comboed, you can throw a Phantom Aegis on him, and then the enemies will fear themselves off of your own ally. So that is a pretty cool thing. And also the shield itself just gives you a huge health pool, which is really nice. And you can get Phantasm stacks, which is really good as well. And to close, I just wanted to showcase what I think is a pretty decent example of getting value from your spells. So in this fight, I'm going to be up against Grim XV, who is another really good PvP player. I'm going to link his channel in the description. He does amazing PvP content. He's extremely good, but in this particular fight, I'm going to showcase one fight where I get some really good value off of my spells, and then another fight where I am not able to get any much value off of my spells. So here we go. So when we start here, you can see that I'm already in a pretty big disadvantage here. I'm coming close to the end of my health pool, and he is basically full, but I'm able to kind of use my movement and the power of Power Surge to keep a little bit of distance and make it harder for him to get consistent damage on me. I'm using Chaos Barrier to try to poke against him, looking for opportunities to stun him if possible. And again, we're kind of just using Whip to keep distance and try to set up little miniature combos, moving in and out with that movement, using Power Surge again to just keep that movement going and keep the ignite damage burning on him where I can. This is a pretty cool use of Chaos Barrier. I know he's not going to proc it, so I use it to proc off of his skeleton so I can get the stun, but unfortunately all my stuff was on cooldown, so I couldn't really convert off of it. Again, we're just kind of keeping distance and slowly burning him down with the power of ignite, but here I should have died but managed to get out of the fear. Barely survived the spear Q, but that ignite is just slowly doing so much damage to him. I'm poking, and I'm finally able to bait out his dash with a dash towards him, and then I can get the punish. And for the next fight here, I'm going to show you the opposite of what happens. Grim does a really good job of punishing me here. I start out with a pretty commanding lead on health. You can see just the damage difference is pretty large here at first. And I'm thinking that I'm doing really well, but he does a really good job just kind of denying my use of my spells to not get as much, not to get as much value off of it. You can see again, like I said, he's already at half and I'm just a little bit above half, but he's doing a good job just blocking things and reacting to my spells, poking, moving in and out, punishing me for using abilities. I'm getting hit over and over. I catch him with an ult, but he gets out of it. And again, he's just countering everything that I have, and it's really difficult for me to find value here. And eventually, even though we are pretty neck and neck here, he lands a really crucial Heart Strike, which kind of just destroys my brain here, where I'm worried about it popping and killing me, and then he punishes me for it by immediately recommitting and destroying me. But anyway, that's going to be it for this video. Hopefully you found this helpful. If you have any questions about things, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and I will do my best to respond. Again, this is going to be a new series here. The next video will probably be going into weapons and weapon swapping and how to get started there. So hopefully this is helpful. And again, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll catch you in the next one.